Okay, well, it is noon, so I'm going to go ahead and kick things off today. This is Catherine Tuttle. I am the Alumni Career Services Coordinator here in the NC State Alumni Association. I'm going to be leading the discussion, but I'm also joined today by 4 hiring managers and recruiting partners here at State, including Christina Moss from Cisco, Jamie Thomas from Hogsplatt, Dave Jones from Allscripts, and Heather Rand from the Insiders. I will go ahead and show you an overview of the agenda. As you can see, I'm going to go through some important points about the interview process, including preparation and telling your story, and how to ask questions. We are going to briefly talk about phone interviews. I get a lot of questions from alumni on that topic, so we'll touch on that versus in-person. And then we're really going to move into an employer question and answer period where you, as alumni, have the opportunity to ask these partners questions, and we'd love for you to reflect back on your experience in the interviewing process and ask any questions.
Press 1 to listen to your message. Press 2 to erase and re-record. Press 3 to continue recording where you left off. Press 4.
I will ask before we get started that if you are not
a presenter, you still there? If you are satisfied with your message, press 1 to listen to your message. Press 2 to erase and re-record. Press 3 to continue recording where you left off. Press 4.
If you could mute your line so we can avoid any.
Are you still there? If you are satisfied with your message, press 1 to listen to your message. Press 2 to erase and re-record. Press 3 to continue recording where you left off. Press 4.
Okay, I'm hoping people can mute their lines.
Sorry you're having.
Okay. I think we're good to go. Sorry about that, everyone. Can everyone still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Good, the joys of live meetings. So if you could just, again, make sure if you're not a presenter, go ahead and mute your line, and that way you can hear us, but we can't hear the background noise that's going on where you are. I'm going to kick things off by just going over some facts to set the stage. Typically in any given month, there are about 25,000 interviews taking place across the country. And at some point, if you are looking for a job, then you are going to become part of this statistic. And fortunately, if you're in a job search right now, there has been some good news lately. So according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, 4.4 million people were hired last month. I do think it's important to also note that only 3.8 million jobs were open. And so you'll notice, obviously, more people were hired than jobs were open. And this is an important fact because not all jobs are posted online. So depending on where you are in your career, and specifically if you are a more seasoned alumni, it is very important that you look beyond the job board and be proactive in your search. So I realize this is a presentation on interviewing, and we will spend a lot of time on that topic, but I really want you to think about the statistic and what it means for you, and understand the importance of identifying your skill set, identifying the companies that have a need for that skill set, and then going out and building connections within those organizations. So when you find these connections, your goal is to start setting up informational interviews. And informational interviews are the best way to get to the company, to find and advertise opportunities for success. And here's where it links into the interviewing process, because when you are meeting with people, you get an inside view of their organization and a better understanding of how your motivations match the interests, motivations, and passions of the people working in the field, how your skill set matches the need of the organization, and so on. So in getting to the preparation portion of this presentation, I really want you to think about, if you haven't already, starting to get out there and do some informational interviews. And it's never too late to start that process. So as we start to talk about preparation and interviewing, I want you to channel your inner Oprah, because a great way to think about interviewing is to think about talk show hosts. Okay, we can learn a lot from talk show hosts about the art of interviewing. So number one, the first thing we can learn from them, they are confident and they're calm, right? So when you're in this interview process, it's important that you be relaxed enough to tell a clear story. Number two, they are prepared and they're curious. Okay, and we're going to talk about this even more as we go along, but they know their subjects, they ask good questions, and they get people to talk about themselves. So you want to make this a conversation, if at all possible. They're genuine and they're passionate. So I think an important thing to keep in mind when you're in the interview process is that people hire people. Okay, we like to think of it as a scientific process, but it's not. Sometimes it comes down to fit, and so it's important that you create a connection and that you show the interviewer that you're passionate about the job. And oftentimes that excitement, that passion can go a long way in helping you stand out. And finally, talk show hosts are structured. They have a plan and they stick to it, right? They prepare in advance and they have the information they need to avoid surprises. So as we're preparing, it's making sure that you are set for success. Part of that is mental preparation, right? And we're going to get into some of the tactical things you can do in terms of telling your story and making sure, you have your materials together and you've done your research. But part of this is mental. And it's important that you know that being nervous is normal and the right amount of nervous is a good thing. You can channel that energy and use it to your advantage. But it's important to understand what calms you down as well. I am going to ask again, just a quick reminder, if you are not a presenter, to mute your line so we can avoid some background noise. Thanks so much. So understanding what calms you down. Okay, when you think about athletes, runners before a race may jump up and down. You may want to do a yoga class. You may want to go for a run. There's also a lot of research that speaks to the power of positive talk. So just repeating positive phrases to yourself, I can do this, I'm prepared, I will do well, has a lot of positive impact on your mental well-being. There's also a recent study lately that came out by Amy Cuddy. She's a social psychiatrist at Harvard, and she actually studied people in the interview process, measured their hormone levels, and actually found that people who struck a powerful pose actually had some physical changes. So their cortisol went down and their testosterone went up. So they actually felt more powerful and more confident. So a lot of times we go into an interview and we sit in the waiting room and we hunch over our iPhones, and just the simple act of kind of cowering down in that seat can affect your confidence. So get there early and maybe go find a place where you can stand up straight and take a few deep breaths and pump yourself up. And then, of course, clearly having an understanding of the organization is important. But on some level, it comes down to kind of a trust in yourself, having a certain confidence level, and feeling the fear and doing it anyway. And there's actually a great book by that title, Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. It's by Susan Jeffords. And if you are feeling like you have a lack of confidence and want to take steps to boost your confidence level and take charge, that could be a great resource for you. So again, when it comes to getting to know the organization you're interviewing with, the best thing to do is informational interviewing, but you can also use sites like Google. I think Google is tremendously underused in the job search. There are industry magazines, utilize LinkedIn, the Book of Lists, sites like Career Bliss and others, and make sure you know who they are, what makes them different, what's going on in their industry, what their business model is, and be up to date on any sort of recent news that's affecting the company or the industry. And again, if you have questions as we go along, please feel free to either chat them in or raise your hand. So when you're preparing, you do want to get to know the interviewer, and I think this is definitely somewhere where our employers can add their insights. But LinkedIn is a great resource for getting to know the people that may be interviewing you. It's very important to keep in mind that you are looking at them and they are looking at you. So when I worked with MBAs at Duke, I used to tell them, you know, it doesn't matter if you're in person, if in person you came across as a professional MBA, if the first picture they get when they Google says party in the USA. So that was a flashback to Miley Cyrus. But make sure that everything associated with you is professional. One of the things that alumni continually forget about is their Gmail account. So Gmail has this feature where you can have a photo that should be a professional photo, not you and your kids, not your dog, not you climbing a mountain. It needs to be a picture that you would want an employer to see. You know, go beyond their job title and their business unit. See if you can find something that you might connect with on another level. For instance, you know, they volunteer at a similar charity or have been to the same alma mater as you, those types of things. And know the difference between a recruiter and a hiring manager. Recruiters typically are focused much more on the skill set and want to know whether or not you have the skills to do the job. Once you get to the hiring manager, to someone within the organization, it's much more about fit, and they're going to go in depth a bit more on specific issues and goals within the organization. And again, I'm going to keep saying this, it's never too late for informational interviews. So if you have an interview coming up, reach out to an alum and let them know, you know, I've got an interview with your organization, I'm really interested, I've done some research, would love to talk to you more about X, or would like to get your opinion on Y, right? Let people serve as a resource to you. And Christina, you mentioned you had a point here about doing research on the interviewer.
Yes, so when you're researching your interviewer, whether the recruiter gave them your name or you've been speaking with them directly, I mean, this is you all's first time meeting in your interview, be mindful of how you present the information that you found while researching their personal sites, whether it was LinkedIn or on Facebook. So nothing is wrong with doing the research, but when you're in the interview, present it in a way of, during my research and preparation for the interview, I saw that you used to work here or you used to do this. That is a proper way to do it. I've been in many interviews where the interviewee has come out of nowhere and told me what my birthday was. And that's a little off-putting as an interviewer because you know that people are looking you up, but at the same time, they can forget that while they're in the interview, and you don't want to put someone in a defensive mode, but phrasing it properly can show that you're proactive and things of that nature. So if you can just word everything and phrase it to show how competent you are, it can really get you far.
Great. That's a great point. Thank you.
Catherine, and this is Jamie. If I can also speak to that, another thing I would say is to be careful how much weight you put on some of the things you'll find online.
Okay.
Not necessarily through LinkedIn, but when you look at some of these sites, the other sites that you mentioned, Vault and WebFeed, those type career sites. I work for a private organization, and a lot of the information I see on there was not provided by our organization, and therefore it's not true. So don't come into the interview saying, well, I see that you guys had this much revenue last year, which is probably not true in the first place and also inappropriate. So be careful of the information you find out and use it as a resource. But again, as was mentioned before, use it in the right context.
Exactly, and that's where I think informational interviews are key, right? So vetting that information with somebody who can be honest with you before you get to that point would be important. And also, I think you're exactly right, both of you. Keep in mind that some of these sites, too, are opinions, right? So some of these are people who have opinions about the organization and making sure to weigh that information as well. Again, if we can mute our lines, so that we don't hear the background noise, that would be great. Okay. So we're going to get into some of the more important pieces here about knowing your story. And of course, knowing the information and knowing your interview are important. But if you don't know your story, then we're going to have a problem. So I want to spend the majority of our time here talking about how do you frame your career, right? So reflect back on your career, on the ups and the downs, and it's really important for you to know what is relevant to the position and what is relevant to the organization. You want to stress your contributions, you want to recognize your limitations, and you want to segregate the content from the context. So companies often overestimate the value of industry experience. And so again, for career changers, because this is true, if you're switching industry or you're switching function or both, you really need to hone in on the transferable skills that you've developed and clearly articulate how they would benefit the organization. And when you start to think about telling this story in an interview setting, the STAR framework, and a lot of you may be familiar with this already, can be really helpful, again, especially for career changers. And what STAR stands for is situation, task, action, and result. And it's a succinct way of articulating how your past performance will predict future behavior. So when you're working on that, it can be helpful from an interview standpoint, but it can also be helpful in working with your resume. And so on your resume, we are going to focus on the action and the result. And for an interview, you get a little bit more time, so we're going to give some. Am I having an echo to everybody?
Yes.
You are. Okay. Let me see. I'm sorry, guys. Work through first round of WebEx. Yes, I think we're going to try and mute everybody. Okay, can you all still hear me? Okay. I'm going to mute everybody until the end, and then I will put it back on so that our recruiting partners can talk as well. Okay, thanks, Jamie. So from an interview standpoint, you have some time to elaborate more and talk about the situation and the task. The STAR model is hugely beneficial in that it helps you to identify your accomplishments and not just your responsibilities, and it ensures that you present a variety of transferable skills. Again, for career changers, it's helping you make the case that you will be a credible asset within a new role or a new organization. The STAR application. Keep in mind that each STAR story really should only be about 90 seconds to 2 minutes, and only 15 to 30 seconds of that should be spent talking about the situation and the task. Why? Because situations and tasks don't get you job offers. Actions and results get you job offers. It's important to note that you do need results for every answer, but they may not always be quantitative. I think this is particularly tricky for people who aren't in sales or who aren't in a technical space, right? How do I quantify what I'm doing if I don't have numbers associated with it? So in those cases, let's think about, what were the goals related to your actions, right? Why did you do something? Was it to increase communication among departments? Was it boosting morale? Was it simplifying the customer experience, right? It doesn't just have to be a number, but it's important that you know what you did and why it was of value to the organization. and practice. The key to getting good at interviewing is practice. You need to get your timing down, and you need to get to the point where you are telling your story in an effective manner. So you need to get it down to 2 minutes. You can practice with your spouse, a friend, by yourself. I know people that just talk to themselves in the car. If you have a commute, ask yourself questions and just practice saying the answers out loud. But whoever you work with, whether that's me in the Career Center or someone else, make sure it's somebody who can give you honest and constructive feedback. You don't want somebody who's going to sugarcoat things for you. Really ask them, am I getting to the point? Am I giving you the information you need to know? And from a time standpoint, actually using a stopwatch can be really helpful. Your iPhone has a stopwatch. BlackBerries these days have a stopwatch. You will be amazed at how quickly 2 minutes goes by. So really have a sense of how fast you're going through these stories and whether you're spending time on the relevant points. So you may be wondering as well, kind of how do you know which stories are relevant to the position you're interviewing for? And that's a good question. It really can seem overwhelming when you think about it, but I suggest looking at the job description. I mean, if you know what role you're interviewing for, so look at the job description, think about the conversations that you've had with alumni and other advocates, and you should start to see some themes, some things that seem really important to that role in that organization. So let's create a table to put some structure around this and help organize your thoughts. So across the top, I want you to list your key skills and qualifications, and then create star stories that speak to those experiences. And again, focus on the results and your value. And then you can categorize those stories, and some of them may overlap. So for example, you may have a story about quickly adapting to a new technology, or taking the lead on a project and leading a cross-functional team. But really going through your previous experience, thinking through what specific examples are relevant, and actually writing some of those out and categorizing them can be really helpful. That way you can pull from these examples when you're going through the interview process. Again, if you have questions as we're going, please feel free to type them in, and to our recruiting partners that are on the line, please definitely shoot me a note if you want to say anything. Sorry we had to mute everybody. I do think it's important to touch on the questions that you should expect in the interview process. Of course, every interview is different, but there are some general questions that you should be prepared to answer no matter what, and we're going to run through those. The first one is tell me about yourself. This is the most relevant summary of your experience, skills, and interests, and it leads to why you want this specific role within the company. Walk me through your resume is very similar. Recent grads, you can start with college. You can include internships and other relevant experience that you had while in school. If you have 15 years of experience, 20 years, 25, you don't necessarily have to go all the way back. So you want to summarize pieces, and you want to draw out, again, the key information that is relevant to the role. And the transitions here are going to be key, right? What led you from one position to the other? I mean, I tell alumni when I'm working with them all the time, we can make your resume beautiful, we can make it perfect, from a technical standpoint, but it still does not talk for you, and it doesn't explain your transition. So if you have 3 roles in 5 years, an employer is going to want to know why you went from place to place to place and why you're now looking within their organization. The why this role, et cetera, this is where you can really show your passion for the position, the industry, or the organization. And I hear from hiring managers, and I feel like they're going to say this later, but if you have 2 candidates who can do the job and both of them have all of the skills necessary, but one of them is clearly more excited, clearly more passionate, has done their research, they're going to go with that person because you can't teach people to be excited about their job. You can teach them technology. You can't teach them, how to love what they do or have a passion for the organization. Key accomplishments, this should always be professional. And we want to relate it back to the needs of the role. For strengths and weaknesses, this is really where people can get caught. Oftentimes, when it gets to the weakness point, an employer is really looking to know two things. One, that you're self-aware enough to know that you're not perfect, and two, that you're willing to work on your weaknesses. So, for example, you may not be the best public speaker, but you've joined Toastmasters to get more experience and boost your confidence. Or maybe early on in your career, a former boss told you that your project management skills could use some improvement, so you really took that to heart and you make sure you read publications on the topic, or you've taken an online course, something along those lines. You don't want anything that's detrimental to the role, obviously, but you do want it to be something beyond, I'm a perfectionist, or one of those kind of basic answers. It needs to be something a little bit deeper that tells the employer something about you. From a question standpoint at the end, of course, the employer is going to ask you, do you have any questions for me? And that is an important point in the interview. You should always have questions. It's a great way to show your interest in the organization, and it's also a great way for you to show off the research that you've done. So I've listed some potential questions here. If you are a career changer, there is another option for you that I would recommend. I want you to feel out kind of what your relationship is, what your rapport is like with the interviewer. But if you are someone with a background who's not traditional for the role, I think at the end it's perfectly appropriate to acknowledge that and say, I realize that my background is a bit non-traditional for someone interested in this position, but I really am excited about the opportunity and feel like I could be an asset to the organization. Having spent the past hour with me, getting to know my background, are there still concerns that I could address while I'm here? It's a bit gutsy, but you leave knowing that everything is on the table. And I have worked with alumni in the past who have said this is the question that really helped them get the job, because they knew when they left that they had addressed all of the potential concerns that an employer might have. The candidates who ask relevant questions and seem interested in the answers really do stand out. Again, phone interviews. This is a hot topic among alumni, and it certainly is no longer a quick phone screen. So, they're looking for more than just, can you put a sentence together? This is typically your first round interview, so you should prepare as if it is in person. In general, the key here is keeping your answers short. This is important over the phone because you're not getting the face-to-face feedback. So checking in every once in a while is important. Asking questions like, did I answer that question correctly? Am I giving you what you're looking for? Those types of things. We've talked about this a lot just in this webinar, but avoiding background noise is important. You want a quiet place. If you can get a landline, that's wonderful. If not, clarify in the very beginning that you are on a cell phone and make sure that there is a plan in place if for whatever reason you get disconnected, that you can get back together. Standing up actually affects your presence when you're talking with someone over the phone. So it actually helps you project. And then finally, please, 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 when you're on the phone, do not read from a script. It is very obvious to people, to the interviewer, that you are reading from notes. So I think it's tempting as somebody who has a phone interview to really have a ton of stuff out in front of you and all your star stories written out, but it's better for you to have your resume in front of you and maybe some bullets, maybe a pared down version of your star story table to jog your memory, but you certainly don't want to be reading paragraphs. And we're going to talk about Skype in a little bit, but a lot of these points are relevant when you're on a Skype interview as well. When you're interviewing in person, arriving early is important. If you are on time, you're late. And when you're late, you really can't come back from that. So arrive 15 to 20 minutes early, bring a notepad, a pen, and extra copies of your resume. Sometimes, things happen and the person who you thought was going to interview you gets sick. And so somebody who has never seen a copy of your resume is now doing the interview. So make sure you have a copy with you to share with them. Ask if you can take notes in the beginning. Do you mind if I and maybe write some things down that'll help you with your thank you notes later? Observe the interviewer's energy level and mimic it. This is really important. If you tend to be a really upbeat, energetic person and you're sitting in front of an interviewer who is much more serious and monotone, then try to pull it back a notch. At the same time as you are usually more low-key, but your interviewer is really exuberant, then let's try to bring it up a little bit and match their enthusiasm. And the key, obviously, to any interview is answering the question that is asked of you. I have a question from Bernice about a phone screen. Bernice, do you want me to read this to the group or take it? It looks like you read it directly to me, so I don't necessarily want to read it out unless you're okay with that. Okay. So she had a phone screen interview yesterday where the search committee asked questions that appeared more appropriate for an in-person interview. There were long questions that needed long answers. That is a tough situation, and you are going to see that more as you interview, because employers are saving time and money by doing things over the phone. I think that's where practice comes in, really thinking about how to keep your answers succinct. But I think you can always elaborate, but you can't take back things that you've said. So what I would probably suggest is clarifying the question and saying, okay, here's what I think you're asking. I want to make sure I'm hitting the key points. And then, again, try to focus on the most relevant information and then asking, once you've started answering the question, is that what you were looking for? Can I provide more information here? But I think it's hard once you get past 2 minutes or so for employers to stick with you. So I'd rather you make sure you get kind of one point across at a time. And I think some of our recruiters here could offer some great insight as well. So I'll let some of them talk. Dave, do you have any comments on that? I know you do a lot over the phone.
Yeah, and we've actually done a lot, and just to kind of tie into Skype, we've done a lot from an interview perspective to utilizing Skype we have folks that are outside the area. And if we're doing, bulk hiring of 20, 30 folks, instead of flying folks in all across the country, we'll do the Skype interview. So that's kind of a unique blend because it's not in person, but it's not really over the phone. It's a combination of both. So I think you got to be prepared for everything, over the phone, and just see if you can push for that in-person interview, because a lot of things can be explained a lot easier face to face. And I think if you kind of take that sales mentality of you're asking the right things, of did I answer your question? I just want to make sure that my skill set is matching up for what you guys are looking for. And at the end of the day, it may not be the right fit, right? So, that's the other thing is, I think, Catherine, you brought this up earlier, is you're also interviewing the company, right? So you want to make sure it's the right fit. As much as you want to get the job, you want to make sure that you're going into the right role. So I think you got to treat these phone interviews with high priority, because you may only get one shot at it, and the idea is to get into the office. So take them seriously.
Exactly right. And I think, again, the key is clarifying questions. And I like the way you put that sales mentality, making sure that you are checking in and giving them the information that they need. And Jamie and Heather, I unmuted you, so you should be able to talk as well. So finally, kind of closing things out, sealing the deal, ending the interview. When it comes time to close the interview, reiterate your interest and excitement for the role, your excitement for the team and the employer, right? Again, we've talked about showing that passion and that excitement for the role. Ask about next steps. Make sure you know what the next steps are in the process. Ask for business cards so that you can follow up with people. And send thank you notes. At a minimum, send an email thank you within 48 hours. A key point here, if you interviewed with 3 different people, even if they were 3 different people at the same time in a group setting, send them each an individualized thank you. Go back to your notes and see if one of them asked a specific question that you want to follow up on, or if somebody said something that resonated with you, and follow up on that specifically. Never, ever, ever send an email to 3 people thanking them at the same time. So with that, I want to move into the employer portion of this. We've got about 25 more minutes left, and we'd love to hear from you all about your experiences and any questions that you may have. Similar to Bernice, we've got a great panel here. I'm going to kick things off just by asking a couple questions, and then please, again, if you have a question, raise your hand and we can unmute you, or you can chat them in so that we can read them aloud to the group. But I do want to touch on Skype a little bit for interviews. When you use that, do you have any specific tips for alumni who may have a first-round interview via Skype?
This is Dave, and a couple of these are very, I guess, elementary, but sometimes we forget about those. But I think with a Skype, it is a video-based call. So with that, ideally you want to be connected, directly to the internet and not on wireless, because if you have a bad connection or you just don't have enough pipe, the video's not going to be great. So if you can plug in direct, do it. Get in a room and shut the door. I work from home a lot. These calls and interviews, I've got a sign that I put up on my door and just say, on video, do not disturb. I do not want my 13-year-old daughter walking in when I'm on a video. And so the other thing is, dress as if you're interviewing, and that's not necessarily meaning that, or in person, and that may not necessarily mean you wear a coat and tie, but definitely business casual. Don't go in with a t-shirt. Again, you got to treat it as an in-person interview, and you definitely want to, when you start the interview, to make sure that the interviewer, the person on the other side, can see you and hear you clearly. So those are a couple trivial things, but really will make or break an interview.
Great, thank you. I was actually just talking to Christina, one of your colleagues at Cisco this weekend, who said he was interviewing somebody via Skype and was just horribly distracted by the clutter behind him. And he said as much as he wanted to focus on what they were saying, he was reading the titles of books in the background and looking at all this equipment that he had going on. So really thinking about just the setting that you're in as well, and keeping it clear so that the focus is on you and you're actually making a connection with the interviewer versus engaging them with all of the stuff going on behind you. I have a question here from an alum, a 1991 grad, who has a very diverse background in terms of experience. So does he need an elevator speech is the question. And I certainly have some thoughts on that, but would anybody else want to take that one? In terms of someone who has numerous years of varied work experience.
Well, this is Jamie, and I would say, obviously everyone needs an elevator speech. So the basic answer is yes, but maybe even more so for someone who, or it may need to be a more clearly defined elevator speech for someone who has a diverse background, because if you can take all of that experience and pare it down into this is what all of this experience represents about me, then it'll be a lot easier for the company who is interviewing you to understand that experience and to see that it can be applied into one direction versus scattered all over the place.
Exactly, and I think to that point, really having a good idea of where you think you fit in the organization, and again, a lot of that comes from doing your research, talking with people, but what is relevant to them, and focus on that. We don't need to know everything you ever did. We need to know what's relevant to the job you want versus the jobs that you've had. For those of you, again, that use the STAR framework, or even those that don't, how important is it that an interviewee kind of get across those specifics around the situation, the task, the action, and the result? What is your experience in that area?
This is Jamie again, and I took quite a few notes on that point. And the message I would say about that one is that, I am professionally trained to interview candidates. It's what I do all day long. So I'm going to ask you the questions in the format that you're probably going to give me the answers that I'm looking for. However, a lot of my hiring managers are not as well trained at interviewing, and they probably are not going to ask you questions in a format that automatically prompts you to answer a question in that STAR format. Mm-hmm. However, they're still going to respond more positively to a candidate who answers questions in that way. So if you've, narrowed down your stories, you've practiced, even though they're not going to, especially since they may not prompt you to answer a question in that way, it's even more important that you're used to answering questions in that way, because the response is still a positive one from that hiring manager.
Great. That's a great point. Anybody else that wants to speak to that? I did get a question from an alum about seeing a specific slide about questions to ask the interviewer, and I'm happy to go back to that, but please also know that we are going to send this PowerPoint out afterwards as well, so you'll have access to all of the content that was here. Okay, great. In terms of that fit piece, I know we've talked a lot about that so far. Obviously, it's important for alumni to articulate that they have the skills required for the position, but how important is it for you as a hiring manager to have an understanding of kind of their passion for the role or the organization?
Can you hear me?
Okay.
I certainly say that passion is extremely important. I've been a small business owner for over 10 years, and to me, like you said earlier, when it comes down to two people, skills and desire, I can teach skills. I can get somebody trained in skills, but I can't train somebody in desire to do something. So especially the small business owner, you're investing in the person that you're hiring, so you want to know that they're going to fit in well and they're going to have a strong desire to be part of the team and help the business grow.
Great. That's a great point, especially I think you're right, Heather, for someone coming from a small business standpoint where you are part of a small team. Would anybody else like to speak to that from one of the larger organizations as well?
Yeah, this is Dave. I would say, outside of just the position, you've got to leverage, any personal experience that you have towards the company. And in Allscripts being in a healthcare IT company, you have a lot of people who are very passionate about healthcare. So there's a lot of stories that you can leverage in that scenario because it's personal. We all have friends, family, relatives that go to the doctor, right? And we want to make sure it's a great setting. And for what we provide, electronic medical records, I think anytime you can leverage that passion towards the specific company in that industry, it just goes one step further, outside of just hey, I'm a fit for this job. I really want to work for this company, and here's why. And I think if you can get that across to an employer, no matter what industry, and you can give a personal example, that definitely hits home to the interviewer.
Great, thank you. Anybody else with that question? Okay, I've got one from another alum. Kelly is wondering, could any of you give suggestions on the appropriate way to follow up after an interview to guarantee a response from the interview regarding the status of the job once the decision has been made? So many have told me I would know either way, but have heard back from very few interviewers even after a follow-up email. Any of you be able to speak to that?
I think in closing, during the interview, it is appropriate to ask, the interviewer, as far as next steps, can you give me an idea of, where are you guys in the interview process, and then the timing. Some people, they're looking to make a decision right away. Others, you may be the first of 10 candidates they're going to talk to over a 3-week period. So if you don't hear anything after 1 week, well, they still have 2 weeks of interviews to go. So I think it's appropriate to ask during the interview and closing, not only next steps, but the timing, and as far as next steps and follow up, how would they like to see that handled?
I get questions a lot from alumni about calling. I know I typically tell people to do what Kelly has said and send a follow-up email. What are your thoughts on people actually calling you to check in?
It's at the end of the day, I think what's appropriate is follow-up thank you email, and that's really it, because at the end of the day, I mean, we're getting hit with a lot of calls, and in my case, I may be able to influence, but I may not be making the decision, right? So the decision maker is not even, getting the call, right? And the last thing you want to do is to, everybody's busy, right? So the last thing you want to do is to, get 10 voicemails over 2 weeks of someone following up. But I think the follow-up email as a thank you is a nice touch. But outside of that, I think you ask and get an idea of the time parameters, and that's, in my opinion, that's probably what should happen.
Anybody else want to speak to that?
I would agree with everything that Dave said, and then also just from a few personal experiences, not a lot. I understand from the job seeker's point of view that it can be frustrating that you don't get immediate follow-up, but definitely listen when you ask that question that Dave suggested to the answer that they give you, and let that happen. Don't then call right back or do something, outside of whatever guidelines were given to you. And also, if you do decide to make a call and, you leave a message, for example, or, well, specifically when you leave a message, like I said, I understand that it's frustrating not always to get the response in the time that you want, but don't let that frustration carry out on a voicemail if you happen to leave that, or when you're speaking to the recruiter, because as Dave said, we're not always the one making the decision. We have to, work within what we're given, and sometimes we may be equally frustrated, and we certainly don't want to hear from a candidate, a message that says, oh my God, why haven't you called me back, kind of thing. Just keep it professional and say, if you're following the guidelines, and one of those things was to call me back, just say, following up with you, leave your message, and kind of leave it at that.
That's a great point, and I think it's important to remember, again, that people interview people, and so you may be just as frustrated as they are, and so it's important to really understand that these things often take longer than we want. So if they said a week and it's been 8 days, that doesn't mean you're never going to hear back. Think about kind of an appropriate timeline for following up, and remember, try to take notes on what they're saying when you ask, what is the timeline, what are the next steps in this process. And I have a note from an alum who mentions the handwritten thank you note really being key. I still hear this from recruiters, that it adds a nice touch. I mean, clearly, given the prevalence of email and smartphones, getting something to the person right away and letting them know via email that you appreciated the interview is at a minimum required. But what do you all think about the handwritten thank you note? Does that actually stand out to you in the process?
I would say, this is Heather, I would say certainly for a small business, rather than a large company of some of the other people on the call, it does make a difference. If somebody took 5 minutes to sit down and handwrite out, actually put a stamp on and stick it in the mailbox, it does say a lot of their attention to detail, and then, of course, how important they thought the interview was and how interested they are in working in the company.
Great.
I would say for organizations, and I won't say any size, but even larger organizations, we're still people that work at large organizations too. And like you said, people interview people. So it's definitely appreciated when you get a handwritten thank you note that, as you said, lists some personal things from the interview and helps maybe remind the interviewer of which candidate you might be just from your thank you note, not having to go back and look through resume. So I would say, in my experience, I've never had an experience where I got a thank you note and went, no way, this is not the guy or girl.
Yeah. That's a great point. I actually just got a note from an alum, too, who's wondering about kind of that balance. So if you put a handwritten note in the mail, the same day of the interview, and let's say, it may take a few days to get there, do you still want kind of the short email right after the interview and then follow up with the handwritten, or is that enough? I mean, what is the kind of ideal turnaround?
This is Dave. I guess it's personal preference. I'd say just do one or the other, right?
Okay.
I mean, and at the end of the day, I mean, it's definitely a nice touch, but, your performance in the interview, your background, skill set, at the end of the day, that's going to get you the job. We've hired plenty of people that haven't sent thank you notes too as well, right? It's just an extra touch. It could be the differentiator, but at the end of the day, it's up to the individual's background and their performance during the interview.
Yeah. And I think it also relates to the timeline, right? So if they say, well, we're going to, we've got still another week of interviews or 2 weeks of interviews, then you have plenty of time to get a handwritten to them before the decision is made. If we're really trying to wrap this up and we have one more day of interviews and then we're going to, get together and make a decision, then you probably want to do just the email versus the other. So again, listening to what they say in the next steps portion. As we wait for more people to type questions in, wanted to ask you guys if you had any particular advice for career changers. Seeing a lot more people who are, looking to change industry, change function, both. Any tips for them in the interview process to help get the transferable skills across?
This is Dave. What I would say to that, there's certain roles that within a company may or may not require industry experience. And I know, personally within healthcare, there's certain groups of managers that you have to have healthcare experience or be a nurse. But there are a lot of other jobs that you don't. And what I would say to that is anyone that has, years of experience and has already made that change and crossed industry is, during the process and during the interview, you want to give that specific example of, right, how you achieve that goal of, hey, I know as product management in a telecom company, I used to be within a small business. I made that transition, and here's what I did, and this is what I needed to do to ramp up. And I can do the same thing as far as the core skill set. Getting into this new industry, it's very similar. I've already made that change. So I guess you're digging down and showing where you're adaptable and you've actually done it before versus like, hey, I really enjoy your industry. I want to get into it. I mean, there's really no substance, but I think if you can give real live examples of where you've actually made that change, I think it's a little more comforting to the company that it can be done.
Mm-hmm. Great point.
I would also, and it's a lot of what you've already gone through in this presentation, but say make sure that you don't leave it up to me to make those connections based on a resume. Make sure somewhere through communication, either in a cover letter or whatever opportunity is appropriate, that you make those connections for me, because all the people you're speaking to today, all of us employers, especially in recruiting, get, many, many, many resumes, and I'm sure you've all heard before, you get, however many seconds on each resume. So don't leave it up to us to make those connections for you. Mm-hmm. Go ahead and do that work ahead of time, because that's more your job than it is our job.
I think that's a very important point, right? As they need to connect the dots for you and provide you enough information that you can clearly see how what they did in their previous role applies to this new position, where the value add would be. I do have a question from an alum who's wondering how to approach applying for a job with a company where you previously interviewed and did not get an offer. Any suggestions there?
Hey, Catherine, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
So any suggestions there with somebody who previously applied, interviewed, did not get the job, but now wants to apply for another position with the company?
This is Dave. I mean, I think it's I think it's appropriate. You know, every job, you know, could be a different job, right? It could be a different group, and you know, I think that's where it's really important to get that feedback. If you don't get the job, you know, what did you miss on? You know, are there some things that are coachable, right? Is it, you know, is it something that you can leverage? Because maybe it's not. Maybe you're just not the right for that position, right? I mean, there are different skill sets that are needed for different groups. And, you know, I think it is appropriate, but I think also you definitely want to leverage your skills and make sure you're, you know, applying to appropriate jobs, right? Versus, hey, you know, my background or degrees in marketing, you probably don't want to apply for a position that's, you know, for a technical architect or for a computer science degree. So just make sure it's appropriate, but I think I think that is the right thing to do, especially if it's a company that you're interested in working for, and if you're able to get some feedback on why you missed, being able to address those things on the next interview.
That's a great point. I think getting feedback is a great way to move forward, whether that's, you know, sitting down with me here in the Alumni Association to do a mock interview and maybe get some coaching on where you could improve your answers, or reaching back out to the recruiter, the hiring manager, to say, you know, I appreciate you letting me know. Do you have some feedback for me that might be helpful, you know, when applying to another position? Is that something that you guys are typically open to doing, providing a little bit of feedback on how they did in the interview?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, constructive feedback, absolutely. Now, if it's a situation where someone just bombed in that scenario, then, you know, we're probably not going to, you know, give that feedback. But if there's some areas that we can coach on and saying, hey, look, you know, you applied for a job that requires A, B, C skill set, and you have X, Y, Z. We feel like you have appropriate skills, but maybe here are some other groups that would be potentials. You know, for your skill set, right? So I do think the feedback is appropriate. You know, as a candidate, you may not get it, right? Because if the manager's talking to 10 different people, and they come back and go, I'm interested in these two for next round interviews, you know, from a recruiting standpoint, we try to do our best to get that feedback to provide to candidates. Sometimes it's provided and sometimes it's not. So don't think you're going to get that feedback, you know, more than 50% of the time, but you got to ask.
Right. Yeah, and I actually got a question from an alum who said, why don't recruiters reply to my emails, you know, once I'm rejected? And I think that is something kind of like the interview process. On some level, you know, it is what it is, and some people are going to write you back and some people aren't. And, you know, there are times where they have some really useful feedback and sometimes where they don't, and it's hard not to take it personally. But most people do have to interview multiple times before they land their next position, and oftentimes it isn't because you're doing anything wrong. It's just it's a tough market, and so it's good to get feedback when you can, but it's also good to try to stay positive and learn and move on from that experience. We are coming close to the end of time. It's been almost an hour, but we are open to taking more questions if you have any. In the meantime, one last question for you guys. For people who haven't interviewed in a while, do you have any kind of final words of wisdom or coaching that you could provide to make them feel a little bit more comfortable with the process?
Hey, Catherine.
Uh-huh.
Okay, I think I've been on mute the whole time.
Oh,
so,
no.
But to answer that question, the best way that I have found, because I have been through many interviews, I have transferred various jobs, industries, everything you can think of, is to really know your story. I know we went over it before, but I can't emphasize how confident you can come off by just knowing your story and really go through what the situation was, what behavior you took, and what was the action. That'll always win you over. And practice. Practice makes perfect. I always emphasize Googling, what you can do using your resources as attending webinars like this. See if you can get in with a career coach both on campus or in the Alumni Association, just so you can practice with them, just to warm yourself up. And also try to network as much as you can. So if you know a career fair is coming up, even though that is not an interview, just that is how you get your feet wet, by networking and just going through those things so that you'll start remembering how it is, and it's almost like riding a bike. So the much more you practice and network with other people, that is the best way you can remember how to get into the flow of interviewing.
Thank you so much, Christina. That's great advice.
Yeah, Christina, that's excellent. I think, with that, with the networking, you may not get the interviews. You may be sending the resumes and not getting the interviews. So, leveraging the people in your network, whether it's, former classmates, family, friends, people that you've connected up with LinkedIn, having those coffee sessions. And, whereas it's not an interview, you're still staying warm and you're still staying down the track of having conversations. And I think it's important, because just to sit back and to throw 20 or 30 resumes and not get a response in interviews, that's not going to cut it. You've got to get in and start leveraging your own network, because at the end of the day, I mean, that's where you're going to find your opportunity.
Yeah, and I'll add, given that so much is going on with the Alumni Association, homecoming season is coming up, so there will be a lot of social networking going on there. And also, as you're on this call, you're getting the emails about their tailgates and things going on. I use those as networking, because we're all a part of the same university. So that is a great way to get out there and see what people are doing, and also tell them about yourself. Even though it's a social event, that is a great way to make connections. So I emphasize that during tailgates and during the homecoming season, because I know a lot of different colleges on campus will have little welcome back parties.
And I'll extend that as well. One of the things that I'll applaud everyone that's on this call for is that obviously you've already started to leverage, that you're an alumni of NC State University. And one of the things you see if you're on our end and you're going into a resource like LinkedIn and maybe looking specifically for somebody from NC State, is that as a gigantic network. And it's also a very strong bond. And we've talked a lot about connections. And one of the strongest connections people have with people they don't know a lot of times can be the university to which they're alumni. So, and you immediately have a conversation starter when you meet somebody else from NC State. I mean, who hasn't in the past week had a conversation about how bad our football team looked last week, And so, that may not be, what you necessarily want the conversation to be, but it's a great place to start. And then, it can take that conversation, which is not even technically an interview, and let you practice, getting in the elevator speeches and just practice communicating with other people. Because, again, back to the point, people interview people, and you tend to hire people that you like for whatever reason.
And I'd like to add on to everything everybody's already said, too, is just in the interview, just remember to be yourself. Don't try to be the employee that you think the employer wants you to be, because they may see strengths and weaknesses in you that are going to be able to help their team and help their company. So just be yourself, be who you are, and that will get you a long way, too.
Great. Thank you guys so much. As we are a couple minutes over, we have a couple more questions come in, so if you have time to stay in and speak to those, that would be great. Otherwise, again, it's 1:05, so I do want to officially close out and say thank you to our panelists for joining us today and providing your insight. It was very helpful. I'm hoping that our alumni got a lot out of this interaction. And I just wanted to remind people quickly that we do have career services through the Alumni Association. And so you can email me directly if you want to do a mock interview, review a resume, talk about job search strategy. I know we did talk about things beyond just interviewing today, the importance of leveraging your network. So if you need some support in this process, please do let us know. And again, we'll send the slides out to everyone at the end of this, along with the recording. So thank you to those who joined us. If you do have a minute, employers, I'd love to ask you just one more question kind of as people are signing off.
Sure.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
I have one more about kind of advice on how to land an interview when you've applied for positions with companies, but still, and have networked some, but haven't been able to reach the hiring manager. What are your kind of suggestions around cold calling? We talked a little bit about this, or dropping by in person, and I get a lot of questions around this. So if, as the hiring manager, you could address what your thoughts are for somebody who's thinking about dropping by or maybe just giving you a call.
Well, I'll speak from personal experience. I think the drop-by is a difficult situation to put someone in on the recruiting end or on any end. I mean, you know, very busy hiring managers and recruiters. So obviously we don't want to come off, you know, as someone who's rude or impersonal, but sometimes we just don't have the time to take people who drop in. So I don't think I'd necessarily recommend that. I'll start off by saying that.
No, this is Dave. I totally agree. It's not going to work. I mean, everybody's busy, so just to pop in and try to meet with someone, it's just not going to happen. And that's a tough question, right? And I think, again, you're going to have to go back, and it's almost like you kind of have to look at yourself as a salesperson, right? And you're trying to build out the org chart. And if you're trying to get to one person, you know, how do you get to that person? Who do you connect it with? Who do you know at that company that's connected to someone who's connected to that person? And you're going to have to put on the sales hat and figure out a way to get that get the dialogue, the intro. But just showing up unannounced, that's not going to work. It's going to have to be somebody you know on the inside, or that's connected with this individual that you can leverage some, you know, even if it's a 10 or 15-minute, you know, coffee meeting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think also just looking outside of your immediate network and being willing to put yourself out there to alumni connections and other people that may be able to serve as a resource, and keeping in mind that not everybody is going to respond, right? I mean, we've talked a little bit about this. This can be a frustrating process, and you're going to send more emails and more requests than you're going to get responses, and trying not to take that personally, and just knowing that, you know, there are people that are going to never respond. There are going to be people that respond and say they want to be helpful, but don't end up doing much. And it's just keeping going until you get to those people who really want to help and can serve as an advocate for you. So kind of staying strong, keeping that sales mentality, as Dave said, and really utilizing, you know, all aspects of your network. So again, it's almost 10 after.
How are you? Good.
Hello? Okay. Well, we've hit our time. We're about 10 minutes over. So again, thank you to all of our recruiters. Thank you to the alumni who joined us, and we will get this recording and the slides out to you shortly.
Thank you, guys.